After a business trip, my department head whispered. I'll never forget that night. I replied. This stays between us. He grinned. Then why did you leave your earring in my room? My assistant found it and asked. Whose earring is this? I realized my secret affair was about to turn into office gossip that could ruin us both. I never thought I would be the guy writing a story like this. But here I am. If my wife ever finds this, I guess I deserve whatever happens next. I work in corporate finance in Chicago. I'm 43, married for 18 years to my wife, Natalie. We have 2 teenage kids, a golden retriever, a house in the suburbs, the whole life I thought I wanted. Until I risked it all for a mistake I made on a business trip to New York. It started with an off-site corporate retreat. My department head, Daniel, invited me and my assistant, Sophie, to a 3-day networking conference at the Marriott Marquis in Times Square. The team went every year, but it was my first time going. I didn't think much of it. A few meetings, some networking, a chance to break away from the routine. That's all it was supposed to be. I had never thought about Sophie that way before. Or maybe I had and just pushed it down. She was 29, ambitious, funny, sharp. She had been my assistant for 2 years, and we worked well together. That was it. Until that night at the hotel bar. After dinner with the team, everyone went out for drinks. Daniel stuck around for a few bourbons, but he called it a night early. The rest of us stayed. At some point, it was just me and Sophie, sitting at the bar, drinking espresso martinis, laughing about something I can't even remember. We weren't drunk, but we were past the point of making smart decisions. I told her I didn't get out much anymore. She said her ex never let her enjoy the moment. Then she looked at me a little too long. We ended up outside, walking through Times Square. It was late, the streets still buzzing with tourists, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. It was surreal, like we weren't in our real lives for a minute. I think that's what made it feel okay to do what I did next. I told myself it was just a kiss. I even let myself believe it wasn't that bad. But I knew the second my hands were on her waist, pulling her against me, that I had crossed the line. I still didn't stop. I pulled her into my hotel room, the door barely shutting before she was in my arms again. It was fast and messy and urgent, and when it was over, I felt nothing but dread. This stays between us, I said. She smiled like it was obvious. Of course. I wanted to believe it. The next morning, I could barely look at her. She acted normal. I convinced myself that meant I was in the clear. I just had to get through the rest of the conference, go home, and pretend it never happened. I thought I could do that. I really did. Then, right before our last meeting, Daniel leaned over and whispered, I'll never forget that night. My stomach twisted. I started, but he cut me off with a grin. Then why did you leave your earring in my room? I felt my pulse hammer in my ears. My skin went ice cold. What? I forced out. He pulled a small gold hoop earring from his pocket. Not mine. Sophie's. You left before she did, he said, watching me. I swallowed hard. Not mine. That's funny, he mused. Because your assistant found it. I swear I stopped breathing. Sophie found it. I was fucked. I avoided her the rest of the day. I couldn't even think straight. I barely made it through the last seminar, and as soon as it ended, I went straight to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, head in my hands, trying to figure out how to fix this. I texted Sophie, Did you say anything? She didn't respond. We flew home the next morning. She was quiet on the plane. I told myself maybe she was just tired. Maybe Daniel was messing with me. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. I walked through my front door, hugged my wife, kissed my kids, and tried to pretend everything was normal. It wasn't. By Monday, the office was different. People were looking at me longer than usual. A few whispered when I walked by. Sophie wouldn't even make eye contact with me. By Wednesday, the rumor had spread. I caught pieces of it as I passed by conversations in the break room, the hallway, the elevator. It wasn't even subtle. Marriott, right? I heard it was after drinks. Wonder what his wife would think. My heart pounded every time I heard my name in a whisper. I couldn't work. I could barely breathe. By Friday, Sophie quit. I heard about it from HR first. She had handed in her resignation letter that morning. I barely made it to her office before she was packing the last of her things. Why are you leaving? I asked, shutting the door behind me. She didn't look at me. Daniel told me about the earring. My throat went dry. You didn't have to. She snapped. People talk. He pieced it together. And now the whole damn office knows. I had no words. She exhaled sharply. I can't stay here. I'm not going to be the girl who screwed her boss in New York. She grabbed her bag and walked past me without another word. That was the moment I knew my life was about to fall apart. That night, I went home and tried to act like nothing was wrong. Natalie was quiet. Off. She barely spoke during dinner. I asked if she was okay, and she just nodded. Then, after the kids went to bed, she handed me her phone. "Are you going to tell me about Sophie?" she asked. My stomach turned to stone. I looked at the screen. A text from an unknown number. "Your husband cheated on you in NYC. Ask him about the earring." I had no idea who sent it. Maybe Daniel. Maybe someone else at work. Maybe Sophie herself. It didn't matter. Natalie knew. And I had no way out. I stared at the message on Natalie's phone, my brain scrambling for a way out. A lie, an excuse, anything. But nothing came. My mouth felt dry. My hands were ice cold. She was waiting. Her face was calm, too calm. "Well?" she said. I forced myself to breathe. "I don't know who sent that." Her lips pressed into a tight line. "That's not what I asked?" My voice caught. "It's not what you think." Natalie gave a short laugh. "Not the kind you want to hear from your wife." "That's funny," she said, tapping the screen. "Because I already know what I think. What I need to know is if you're going to insult me by lying to my face." I swallowed hard. If I lied and she found proof, I was done. If I told the truth, I was still done. I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and I had no idea which way to fall. Natalie studied me for a long moment, then exhaled sharply. "You won't even deny it." I opened my mouth, maybe to deny it, maybe to confess, but she didn't wait. She turned and walked away. I followed her. "Natalie, please." She went upstairs, into our bedroom, and locked the door. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the wood grain on the door like it had the answers. I had just lost my wife. I barely slept. I went to work running on nothing but cold sweat and black coffee, still half in denial that this was happening. The moment I stepped into the office, I knew something was wrong. Everyone was quiet. Too quiet. People who usually said good morning didn't even look at me. And then Daniel walked by, smiling. He clapped me on the shoulder like we were old friends. "Rough weekend, huh?" My jaw clenched. "Did you send that text?" His smile widened. "Now, why would I do that?" I stared at him. Daniel was the kind of man who loved power plays. He didn't just want to win, he wanted people to know he was winning. I had always respected him. Maybe even looked up to him. Now, I wanted to punch him in the face. "Careful, boss," he said, lowering his voice. "You're looking a little stressed." Then he walked off like he hadn't just set my entire life on fire. I should have walked away. But I didn't. I followed him to his office and slammed the door shut behind me. "Why the hell are you doing this?" I hissed. Daniel didn't even blink. "Doing what?" "You told Sophie. You spread the rumors." Me?" He laughed, shaking his head. "I didn't say a damn thing, man. You did this all on your own." I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. Daniel leaned back in his chair, looking bored. "Look, if you're waiting for me to apologize, don't. You made your bed. Now you get to lie in it. Alone." I wanted to lunge across the desk and wipe that smug look off his face. Instead, I walked out. And ran straight into HR. They called it a routine inquiry. I called it the beginning of the end. An anonymous complaint was filed. The woman from HR said, her tone professional but stiff. "There's a rumor circulating about inappropriate conduct between you and a subordinate during the New York trip. We need to determine if there was a violation of company policy." I stared at her. "This is a joke, right? We take these complaints very seriously." I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. There were only two people who could have filed that complaint. Sophie. Or Daniel. I felt trapped. "Do you deny that anything happened between you and your assistant?" I hesitated. That was all she needed. "We'll be conducting interviews this week," she said, gathering her papers. "Until then, we ask that you refrain from discussing this with any employees." And just like that, my entire career was on the line. That night, I came home to an empty house. No kids. No Natalie. Just a note on the counter. "Went to my sister's. Don't call me." I gripped the paper so hard it crumpled in my fist. I should have expected this. I should have prepared. But I still felt like I had been punched in the gut. I grabbed my phone and texted her. "Me. We need to talk." "Natalie, not now." "Me, please." "Natalie, you should focus on keeping your job." My stomach dropped. She knew. She knew about the investigation. I stood there, staring at the screen, trying to piece it together. Then it clicked. Daniel. That bastard must have told her. I slammed my phone down on the counter, my pulse hammering in my ears. I was losing everything, my wife, my job, my reputation, and I didn't even know who was pulling the strings. Daniel? Sophie? Someone else at work? All I knew was that the walls were closing in. And I had no way out. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? My wife was gone. My job was hanging by a thread. The entire office was whispering about me. And someone, either Daniel, Sophie, or some unknown person, was controlling my downfall like a sick puppet show. The worst part? I didn't even know what they wanted. By the time morning came, my mind was racing with possibilities. I kept thinking about the text to Natalie. Your husband cheated on you in NYC. Ask him about the earring. The message had no proof. No pictures. No screenshots. Just words. If Natalie hadn't already suspected me, maybe she would have ignored it. But someone knew exactly what buttons to press. I needed to find out who. I walked into work expecting the usual tension. I was ready for more whispers, more cold stares. But the moment I stepped out of the elevator, something felt different. People weren't just whispering. They were staring. Some were even smirking. My stomach dropped. I kept walking, trying to ignore it, but the feeling got worse the closer I got to my office. And then I saw her. Jessica. Jessica worked in another department. She was young, sharp, ambitious. The type to climb the corporate ladder at any cost. She was also Daniel's assistant. And she was waiting outside my office with a look on her face that made my blood run cold. "Morning," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. I didn't respond. Just opened my office door and stepped inside. She followed. I shut the door. "What do you want?" She smiled. "I heard HR paid you a little visit." I clenched my jaw. "What's your point?" Jessica sat on the edge of my desk, crossing her legs slowly, deliberately. She took out her phone, scrolled for a second, then turned the screen toward me. My heart nearly stopped. It was a picture. A picture of me and Sophie. In the hotel bar. Sophie was leaning in. I was looking at her. There was nothing explicitly inappropriate, but the tension was obvious. If you didn't know what happened later that night, you'd still assume something was going on. And Jessica knew it. I looked at her. "Where did you get that?" She smiled again. "Let's just say, some people like to talk. And some people like to record things." I forced myself to stay calm. "So what do you want?" Jessica tilted her head. "Oh, I don't know, maybe a favor." I exhaled sharply. "Of course. What kind of favor?" She hopped off my desk and smoothed out her skirt. "There's an open manager position in my department. I'd love your recommendation." I stared at her, barely believing what I was hearing. "You're blackmailing me?" I said. She shrugged. "Call it what you want. But I'd hate for this to accidentally end up in your wife's hands." My fists clenched. This was a setup. Jessica didn't just stumble onto this picture. She didn't just happen to know about the HR complaint. Someone gave her this. And I had a very strong suspicion that someone was Daniel. I kept my expression neutral. "You're making a mistake." Jessica smirked. "I don't think so." Then she slipped her phone back into her pocket and left my office like she hadn't just tried to ruin my life. I sank into my chair, my heart pounding. Jessica was smart, but she wasn't the mastermind. She was a tool. Someone had fed her just enough information to make a move against me. But why? I sat there, staring at my desk, trying to piece it together. And then my office phone rang. I picked it up. A familiar voice greeted me. "How's your morning going?" "Daniel." My grip on the phone tightened. "You son of a..." He laughed. "Relax," he said. "I just wanted to check in. Seems like you've been having a rough week." I forced myself to stay calm. "You gave Jessica that picture," he hummed, pretending to think. "Maybe. Maybe not. But if I did, well, let's just say it's always good to have friends in the right places." My entire body was on fire. "What the hell do you want?" Daniel chuckled. "You really don't get it, do you?" I waited. Then he said something that made my stomach twist into knots. "This isn't about what I want. It's about what Sophie wants." I went completely still. "Sophie? What are you talking about?" I demanded. Daniel sighed like I was the dumbest person alive. "You think you're the only one she was sleeping with?" I felt the air leave my lungs. No, that wasn't possible. Was it? Daniel chuckled again. "You really are clueless." Then he hung up. I sat there, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Daniel was messing with me. He had to be. But a small voice in my head whispered, What if he's not? I thought back to that night in New York. The way Sophie had smiled after we slept together. The way she wasn't even that surprised when Daniel confronted her about the earring. The way she quit without fighting back. Had I been played from the start? Was I just one of many? I picked up my phone and did something I never thought I'd do. I called Sophie. She didn't pick up. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I clenched my jaw and sent her a text. We need to talk. Nothing. Then, just as I was about to put my phone down, I got a response. But it wasn't from Sophie. It was from Natalie. Natalie, I want a divorce. And just like that, my entire life fell apart. I stared at the text from Natalie until the words blurred. I want a divorce. The thing I had been dreading. The thing I had spent every second trying to stop, had finally happened. And yet, the only thing going through my mind was Sophie. Daniel's words echoed. You think you're the only one she was sleeping with? No. No, that wasn't true. It couldn't be. I needed answers. I needed to see Sophie face to face. I left work early, ignoring the stares, the whispers, the HR lady's email that was surely telling me my job was hanging by a thread. I drove straight to Sophie's apartment. I had never been there before, because we had always been careful. But I knew where she lived. She had mentioned it in passing. When I knocked, there was no answer. I knocked again. Then the door swung open. And Daniel was standing there. For a second, my brain refused to process what I was looking at. Then it hit me like a brick to the skull. He was in her apartment. He wasn't in a suit. He was in sweatpants. Like he lived there. My body locked up. Daniel just grinned, leaning against the doorframe. Well. Look who finally caught up. I couldn't breathe. You. The sound of heels on hardwood made my stomach twist. And then Sophie appeared. She looked at me. Then at Daniel. Then back at me. And the way she didn't look surprised was all I needed to know. How long? I forced out, my voice barely more than a whisper. Sophie sighed, arms crossed over her chest. Does it really matter? Yes. Yes, it mattered. Because I had risked everything for her. Because I had destroyed my marriage, my career, my life, for something that was never real. Daniel smirked. Oh, don't look so betrayed. You were never special. Just convenient. A sharp, horrible laugh left me. I had been played. Used. And the worst part? I had let it happen. You're disgusting. I muttered, stepping back. Sophie just shrugged. This was business, not personal. Business. My life was in ruins, and she was calling it business. I turned on my heel and walked away, before I did something I couldn't take back. Natalie didn't even want to see me. She had already packed her things and taken the kids to her sister's. When I called, she didn't pick up. When I texted, she didn't respond. And when I finally got an email from her, it wasn't a message. It was divorce papers. No second chances. No negotiations. Just done. I don't blame her. I had been a coward. I had lied to her face, betrayed her trust, and for what? For a woman who had been screwing my boss the entire time? I had lost everything. And work? That was gone too. HR called me in a week later. After reviewing the complaint and given the rumors surrounding your conduct, we've decided to terminate your position effective immediately. They didn't even look at me when they said it. I walked out of that building for the last time, a joke to everyone who had once respected me. I should have let it go. But I couldn't. So I did something stupid. I waited for Daniel outside the office parking garage. When he finally walked out, confident, successful, untouched by any of this, something inside me snapped. You ruined my life, I said, my voice shaking. Daniel looked me up and down like I was a piece of gum stuck to his shoe. You ruined your own life, he said simply. I clenched my fists. You planned this, didn't you? Daniel sighed dramatically. God, you're slow. Of course I did. You were a liability the second you got too close to Sophie. I just nudged things along. He smirked. And now? You're out. I'm in. And Sophie? Well, let's just say she's moving on to bigger and better things. My hands shook. You think you won? Daniel stepped closer. I don't think, buddy. I know. I had never wanted to hit someone so badly in my life. But I didn't. Because Daniel was right. I had already lost. It's been 6 months since that night in New York. I live in a small, shitty apartment in downtown Chicago now. I see my kids every other weekend, but they're distant. They don't look at me the same way anymore. I don't blame them. I lost my job, my reputation, my home. Natalie has moved on. She's seeing someone new. She seems happy. And me? I sit in this tiny apartment, staring at the walls, wondering how the hell I got here. I wonder if it was worth it. I wonder if I ever really loved my wife, or if I just loved the idea of her. I wonder if Sophie and Daniel are still together, or if she's already found someone else to use. But mostly, I wonder what would have happened if I had just walked away that night. If I had gone back to my room. If I had never kissed her. If I had never let myself believe I could have something more. But it doesn't matter. Because in the end, I was the only one who lost everything.